Here's something I want you to think about for a second. You're about to send an email, a totally normal professional email, and you read it over 3 times. Not for typos. You're reading it to figure out how the other person is going to feel about you when they read it. You adjust the tone, you soften something, you add an exclamation mark so you don't sound cold, you delete the exclamation mark so you don't sound desperate, you send it. And then you spend the next 2 hours wondering if you came across weird. Sound familiar? Or maybe it's something bigger. You don't pitch the idea at work because you're already running the movie in your head where everyone looks at each other. Or maybe you don't set the boundary with your sister because you're too busy imagining her reaction. You don't wear the thing you actually love wearing because you're picturing what people at the school pickup are going to think. You're not living your life. You're living it inside a performance review that never ends and that no one else is actually conducting. And I want to talk about that today because I think this is one of the most exhausting things we do, and we almost never name it directly. We talk about people pleasing. We talk about anxiety. We talk about perfectionism. But underneath all of it, there's this quiet, relentless loop of imagining what other people think of us and then shaping everything we do around managing it. The loop is costing you some of your life. I had a client a while back, I'll call her Diane. She was smart, she was funny, she was deeply capable, the kind of person that you would trust to run anything. And she came to me because she felt like she was constantly exhausted and she didn't know why. So her life looked fine from the outside. Good job, nice home, people who loved her, but she was depleted in this bone-deep way she couldn't explain. So we spent a few sessions just mapping out a typical week. And what emerged was this. Diane was running a constant background process in her mind every single day of what everyone around her was thinking. Her boss, her colleagues, her kids' teachers, her friends, her neighbors. She wasn't doing it consciously. It was just always running, like an app that you forgot to close. Is she annoyed with me? Did that come out wrong? Did he think I was showing off? Did she think I was being dismissive? So she was doing the emotional labor of managing relationships with people who weren't even in the room, constantly, all day, and it was absolutely draining her. When I reflected that back to her, she went quiet for a long time, and she said, I've been doing that my whole life. She had, all right? Most of us have. So here's the thing that the research in social psychology has been clear about for decades. We are wildly, embarrassingly wrong about how much other people think about us. So there's something called the spotlight effect. It's a phenomenon that was documented by some psychologists, and it shows that we consistently overestimate how much attention other people pay to us. So in these studies, people who walked into a room wore an embarrassing t-shirt and they thought that roughly half the people in the room noticed. The actual number was closer to 20%. And those who did notice, they've forgotten about it almost immediately. I remember watching this video when I was younger of Oprah Winfrey. And there was this woman and they put makeup on her face to make her look as though she had this massive scar. And she went out into the street and she was so self-conscious of how she looked. And when she came back in, they asked her what it was like. And she said, so many people were staring at my face. And the interesting thing was they did this with multiple other people and they all said the same thing. People were staring at my face. They were looking at me. I was so embarrassed about having the scar. What they didn't realize is that a few minutes before they put them out on the street, they'd actually put them in a session with the makeup artist. And the makeup artist had subtly removed the scar. So they'd walked out into the street believing they had a scar on their face, believing that people were staring at them, and actually they didn't have anything. And all of the belief that people were staring at them was imaginary. Isn't that wild? So people are busy living inside their own spotlight. They're doing the same thing you're doing, monitoring themselves, worrying about their own impression, running their own loop. The audience you're performing for is mostly not watching. But still, knowing that doesn't make the loop stop, because this isn't about logic. It's about something much older and much more wider than that. So human beings are deeply social creatures. Our brains evolved inside groups where belonging was survival. So if you were cast out of your tribe 50,000 years ago, you didn't survive the winter. If you had that happen to you, that social rejection wasn't just painful, it was genuinely dangerous. So your nervous system learned to treat the threat of judgment the same way it treats a physical threat, with vigilance, with hyper-awareness, with constant scanning. So that instinct is still running in you right now. When you worry about what someone thinks of you, your body doesn't know you're in a Zoom meeting and not in the savannah. It runs the same way, responds the same way. So your threat detection system lights up. Your mind narrows and sharpens, and it scans for danger. So the next time you catch yourself obsessing over whether someone thought your question was dumb, I want you to actually have some compassion for that part of yourself, because it's not weak, it's ancient. It's that part of you that kept your ancestors alive. The problem is, it hasn't updated its software in a while. So you're not broken for caring what people think, you're human. And the question is whether you're willing to let that old wiring run your whole life. Because here's what I've noticed, and I've seen this with thousands of people. The more you organize your life around what other people think, the less you actually know what you think. So ask someone who lives deep in this pattern what they actually want, what they really want for themselves, not what would make their mother proud or their partner comfortable or their colleagues impressed, what they, in the quiet of their own honest interior, actually want. And often they'll look at you like you've asked a question in a foreign language. They don't know. You've been so busy monitoring the external signal that the internal one has gone almost silent. That's the real cost, not just the exhaustion, though it's exhausting, is that you gradually lose access to yourself. So the self we present to the world becomes so practiced, so managed, so carefully curated for approval that we start to mistake it for who we actually are. And then we spend years wondering why we feel hollow or restless or like something's missing. The thing that's missing is you. So what do you do with this? Now, I'm not going to tell you to stop caring what people think. That's not a thing, right? Your nervous system won't simply agree to that. And frankly, caring about others, caring about how we land, how we affect people, whether we're being kind, that's not the problem. That's actually beautiful. The problem is the surveillance. So the constant monitoring, the performance review that never ends. Now, the shift that I've actually watched work for real, not just as a nice idea, is this. You stop managing what people think and you start getting genuinely curious about what you think. Not what should I think or what's the right answer, but what is actually true for me right now? So it's a small pivot, but it changes the direction you're pointing. So instead of looking outward at the imagined audience, you turn inward toward your own actual experience. And over time, that practice, that small, repeated turn toward yourself, builds something real. It builds what I'd call a reliable interior. So a place inside you that you actually trust. And here's the thing about that. When you have a reliable interior, when you know what you value, what feels true to you, what actually matters to you, you become much less dependent on the external verdict. Not because you've stopped caring about people, but because you have a ground under your feet that doesn't shift every time someone raises an eyebrow. So the freedom you're looking for isn't not caring. It's having enough of yourself that the approval of others stops being the thing your whole stability rests on. So here's your experiment. Just one thing this week. At some point in the next few days, if you can, you're going to face a moment where you're about to do something and you notice the loop start, the imagining of reactions, the adjusting, the managing. When that moment comes, I want you to pause and ask yourself one question, just one. Ask, what would I do here if I knew no one was watching and no one would have an opinion? So you don't have to act on the answer. You don't have to blow anything up or make a dramatic declaration. Just notice what the answer is, because that answer, the one that surfaces when you take the imagined audience out of the room, that's often the closest you'll get to what you actually want. So notice it, write it down if you want, and then if it feels right, take one small step toward it. Just one. That's the practice. Not a grand liberation from other people's opinions, just a small, quiet return to yourself. If anything as this is landing for you, make sure you subscribe. And if you've recognized yourself in this episode and you're starting to wonder how much of your life has been shaped by this pattern, I'd love for you to take the happiness quiz. It just takes a few minutes. It's free. You get a personalized report about where you're at, which is really powerful. Okay? So, you'll find the link in the notes. So you've been busy managing what everyone else thinks that you might have forgotten to ask what you think. That's not a character flaw. That's what happens when we've been performing for a long time without a break. The audience was never as attentive as you feared. The only review that actually matters is the one you give yourself. As always, be kind, take care, go gently in the world.